This is part 2 of my overall thoughts on Wuthering Waves. The first part will be in the description and in the little doobly-doo in the corner, and with that out of the way, I hope you all enjoy. So, it's not really that much of a secret that one of the least polished aspects of Wuthering Waves is the main storyline. There are a lot of hiccups that have been left in the game, which was very much exacerbated by the devs completely redoing a large portion of the story after the game's closed beta. I am going to be spoiling a majority of the game's first storyline, so if you guys don't want to be spoiled, you can boot up the game and play it yourselves. Otherwise, let's begin.
This is the story of a man named Stanley.
So after choosing the gender of our main character, the game starts off with the opening cinematic, which sets up a good amount of intrigue as to who our character is in the larger world. And I have to tell you, they did an amazing job with the visuals and the art style of the game. There is an absolute visual feast that has been lovingly put together by the art team. It does do a good portion of softening the issues with the writing of the plot. And speaking of the writing, we immediately find ourselves with the first issue of Wu was writing when we're woken up.
Signs of trauma. Breathing seems normal. Heart rate should be fast, I think.
Hey, you. You're finally awake.
No, I'm not gonna apologize for that joke. Moving on. So as I mentioned before, you are almost immediately smacked with issues in the plot as soon as you start the game. Things are fairly fine at first. I wouldn't necessarily say I was offended by the start of the game, even if it was a little generic. You're an amnesiac main character who gets found by Yang and Chixia, two of the free characters that the game immediately gives you. You get exposition about a few world-building stuff. Tacit discords are the monsters that populate the world. Resonators are the characters that you play that fight against them. Your little gourd thing is like a Pokeball that also counts as a diegetic main menu screen. The works. And you're then attacked by the tutorial boss who, by the way, goes insanely hard design-wise for an enemy that you dunk at the start of the story. You then absorb its echo through your hand, which is apparently an abnormal event in this world, so Yang and Chixia decide to take you to the starting city of Jinzhou to talk to the magistrate. And this is when the great yappening happens. The next hour or so is filled with characters just giving you a lot of useless exposition that just isn't important. Every single mechanic or background fluff has minutes of explanations and reiterations that they keep talking about. The same things over and over and over and over and over again. It got to a point where I kinda just gave up on the main storyline and I just fucked off to do side quests and the events. I only really came back to the main storyline after I explored basically half of the map, and by the time I finished the first section of the story, it gives you even more boring shit to do afterwards. The magistrate ends up being absent for an unspecified important event that she needs to attend to, and you're left with this little mystery puzzle thing that's supposedly connected to your past in some way. This sounds interesting, right? Back to talking to characters while they exposition more shit at you. And it's not like I don't want to learn about the world that the characters are trying to sell us, right? I don't want to have to listen to hours of droning dialogue from what is unfortunately really bad voice acting. I want to see the shit in the history lessons that they're telling us. I don't want to feel like I'm in a classroom in history class while Mrs. Mendoza is telling us about the history of the Katipunan. Sorry, I'm Filipino. Thankfully, in the midst of your investigation into the puzzles, you eventually find yourself at this abandoned village. And if you think I'm just gonna complain about the entire story, this is where it actually starts to get good. The reason for that shift is the introduction of the best character in the game, and I'm not gonna take any other answers. This right here is motherfucking Scar.
Look at this! Look at this! It's perfect!
So, an element of the plot that I figured I'd save for now is a faction called the Fraxidus. They're basically Team Magma. They want to resurrect the big bad guy and destroy the world and blah 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 blah. I couldn't care less about that part. I'm only bringing them up because Best Boy is part of that club. Scar is basically your "we're not so different, you and I" antagonist. And while he isn't an original idea, he's packaged with a delightful presentation. He has you answering the mystery of what happened to the village with clues that you find scattered around. And each time you give him your thoughts, he narrates this storybook-style flashback of how the village tore each other apart. Long story short, a guy comes to the village with the promise of granting wishes and keeping everybody safe. Each villager has to make a sacrifice in order for their wishes to be fulfilled, which is a sacrifice that's usually shunted onto another villager, and the cycle keeps going. One villager, the small child, starts asking too many questions, and the wish-making guy stops granting everyone's wishes, pointing at her lack of faith as the cause. The villagers go berserk and kill her, and then the wish granter kills the village for their crimes. After he concludes the story, he tries to bring you to his side. After all, you can't really trust other humans, am I right? You tell him to fuck off, and you have this amazing boss fight with him. I mean, it's the presentation on it is just absolutely peak. And then Yang Yang interrupts the battle, causing him to fuck off. And man, I gotta tell you, I was fucking hooked this entire section of the story. Scar's voice actor fucking put his back into his lines. He screams Shadow the Hedgehog edgy with the dialogue, and it's both so funny and so endearing at the same time. It helps so much that you actually hear the emotion in his voice after being subjected to
We are in the gorgeous spirits. It's on the outskirts of Jinzhou. Gone long. The wind is morning. They heard season merging. It's a new task
yeah, subjected to that. With the information you've gathered so far, you figure out how to solve the puzzle and finally get to meet with the magistrate Jin Shi. You get more lore, and Scar shows up again for another tussle. You beat his ass again, and he is taken to jail, and you're tasked with meeting up with a faction known as the Black Shores. They're basically a shadowy information gathering group, and along the way, you meet with a few of the other characters in the game. The most important ones are Encore and Alto, as they are both members of the Black Shore, and they actively help you with this section of the story. After they confirm that you're legit, you meet up at this abandoned facility where they make a One Piece reference, And after a bit more puzzle solving, you learn that the scientists here were studying into a phenomenon known as the retroact rain. It's an effect that causes phantoms of the past to appear in the present, and they were effectively trying to use this effect to resurrect some kind of unknown powerful entity, or something along those lines. And as you're headed back to the city, you get a distress call from your buddies. In a completely unforeseeable set of circumstances, there is a retroact phenomenon happening at the city, and they need your help. You hoof it back, and you see that the place is being sieged by phantom soldiers, as well as the Tacit Discords. A really fun part about this sequence is that the game actually has AI companions that fight alongside you. You know, not just the resonators that you can swap between with your own build and stuff. There actually is AI companions that will stand alongside you and actually hit the opponents with you, which I thought was really cool. I would really love to see some kind of event or some kind of game mode where you have your main character fighting alongside other party mates or something along those lines. That would be great. Anyway, you are tasked with meeting up with General Gian, a motherfucking G of a character who's fighting at the front lines alongside his troops. You even get instances where you're actually playing as Gian and seeing the retroact rain through his perspective, as he is experiencing visions of his own men calling out for help and the old general, who was a fucking insane person, taunting him all the while. It's actually some pretty intriguing stuff. Gian's a pretty interesting character, especially when you try out his companion storyline. Don't worry, I'm not gonna go over that right now. After fighting through a bunch of monsters, as both yourself as well as Gian, the two of you finally meet as the big bad guy is manifesting off in the distance. You tag team like motherfucking bros to end this shit, and a bunch of bad guys get their shit kicked in as you're climbing up these broken structures that are held aloft by reverse gravity. It's pretty fucking sick. Your other party mates elect to stay behind to cover your guys' flank as you and Gian bust down the doors to the final boss to finish off 1.0's story. And the fight is sick as hell. Gian gets knocked out halfway through the battle, and as you're fighting with the boss, you actually manage to absorb some of its power through your hand, and you turn into motherfucking Sephiroth. Yeah, you get an entirely new moveset and element to work with, and as you're beating up the boss, it charges up this massive attack at you, but fucking Giga Chad Gian comes back and intercepts that shit. With the unmitigated power of bros being bros, you beat her ass into a pulp and win the battle. But because she's a bitch, she tries to blow herself up to try and take out both you and Gian. But this creature pops out of your hand and it just eats her. I have a feeling that this thing is that little godlike creature that was mentioned back at that facility earlier. It takes a nap and disappears back into your hand. You go outside, and then there's this PowerPoint presentation-ass cutscene that just ends, and that's it. The story kind of just ends there. And if you feel like there should have been something more going on here, I did too. You know, I expected there to be some kind of epilogue here, some kind of wrapping up scene where you are actually talking to the characters and you're celebrating and you're, you know, dealing with the fact that there is some kind of godlike entity living in your hand. That would have been nice to at the very least, acknowledge. But you don't even have a chance to have a conversation with anybody to, like, point it out. So you're just kind of stood there, you know, with your dick in your hand, and that's it. So, here are my overall thoughts on Wuthering Waves' story. The beginning is a painful slog. The way it's been made justifies the existence of the skip button alone. Between the awkward voice acting and the frankly absurd amounts of dialogue with the random bits of information that just are not relevant to what's going on at all, It was like being tied to your bed while you could smell food being cooked downstairs. It just makes you wish that you were doing other parts of the game more. However, from the halfway point and beyond, the story actually takes a nice turn and actually has some enjoyable moments. However, the ending, it leaves a lot to be desired. The abruptness of it, as well as the PowerPoint presentation cutscene, kind of gave me the impression that they either ran out of budget or they had to push the game out faster than they could animate things. And yeah, overall, I do feel optimistic. It feels like the devs do know how to put together a story that is enjoyable to get sucked into. I just hope that they can continue the pattern that they made with the latter half of the game and bring that into the version 1.1 story. So, what do you guys think? If there is anything that I missed, or if you have any reactions to my thoughts, I'd love to hear it in the comment section below. I would very much enjoy to discuss this topic with you guys. I'm probably going to make a follow-up video to tie up any loose ends I've left with this video and the previous one, but until then, I hope you all take care of yourselves.